Cold War Video Notes Part 2. So we left off with the Cold War really kicking off, and just as a quick review, hopefully you had a chance to look at the new questions that are in the videos. Go to Edmodo and put your answers in. As you can see, we're starting off here with Stalin's response to all of this new change. And again, he's obviously going to take the view that this is a struggle against capitalist imperialism. But what's interesting is they start to see, and he starts to report, that there are U.S. plots all over Europe. And of course he sends folks in to actually fabricate these plots just to try and get things riled up. The events behind the rhetoric. This was in the reading and is one of our quiz questions, that there are things that are going to become global issues that aren't necessarily part of the Cold War rhetoric. For instance, China is going to go to civil war. That's obviously hot, not cold. The country of China is going to become communist as Mao Zedong establishes the People's Republic of China. Over in Iran, the USSR is going to agree to leave Iran after the war, and it did not. They're actually going to stick around, and they want some oil concessions. So one more bit of proof that oil is always a factor. And we're going to actually see Iran become a piece of the puzzle, another part of the story, a little bit later when we get into the 70s, and it's going to be over oil again. So stay tuned for that. So Truman's response is to send warships into the Persian Gulf, and so Stalin's going to back down. So again, it's this seesaw effect of one person does something, the other person pushes back, and then we really don't ever exchange bullets, but again, it's kind of like a testing of wills. Turkey's got a star next to it, and that is, of course, always an important thing to pay attention to. Stalin tries to force Turkey to allow Soviet bases to be positioned along the straits leading to the Mediterranean, and this, of course, has been a central part, an important part of geography for a long time. If you remember back to World War I with the Battle of Gallipoli, things like that, being able to get into land and up into Russia, USSR. So once again we see one side trying to take something over or strengthen their position, the other side pushing back. The United States threatens to intervene, he backs down. The reason why this is such an important thing is, and why I just want to draw your attention to it, is the fact that the United States has already got missile bases implemented in Turkey. They were there after World War II, and that's going to play a role in our story when we get over into the Cuban Missile Crisis. The events behind the rhetoric. So again, Great Britain, having lost a lot of the resources, or at least not being as strong a power anymore after World War II, doesn't have the resources to kind of help Greece keep the communist parties from taking over. They're fighting the new Greek government, so of course the United States has to help. And what this all kind of centers around is that the United States sees the Soviet Union as a threat, and so if more communist countries are going to become in the European area, then that's going to, of course, be a threat to capitalism, to democracy, etc. So in March 1947, we see the Truman Doctrine issued, where we agree to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation outside the United States. So they're going to send in money, they're going to send in aid, they're going to send in military backup in order to help help the countries to resist communist attack, to rebuild those territories. And with that you get into the Marshall Plan. So you've got an ideology and then the actual implementation with Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan respectively. So I added a slide so that you could kind of see exactly what the Marshall Plan is, giving monetary support to help rebuild European economies. And that's the word you kind of want to focus on with rebuild. Where Truman Doctrine is, oh, we should probably go do this, and the thought process and the ideology, the Marshall Plan is actually putting that ideology into place. Notice that the goals are to help rebuild war-devastated regions, remove trade barriers, that's very important, especially in capitalist societies, modernize industry, and to make Europe prosperous again. The underlying goal is, of course, to help prevent the spread of communism. Poland is going to become a communist state in all of this, and I do hope that you take a moment to look at the maps that are in the back of the room, look at the maps in your book, and kind of figure out which countries are communist and which ones aren't. Communism and Poland is kind of a sticking point for the United States. As you can see, Roosevelt is seen as selling out the Poles, selling out Poland, allowing it to fall to communism. When elections are held under duress, that is under stress, that is they're not necessarily getting to vote the way that they want to vote because someone is pressuring them to vote a certain way. There's an 80% communism win! Woohoo! So they create a one-party state under Soviet control and pretty much proceed to take over. And this, of course, is going back on, is drawing back upon some of that hatred from the beginning of World War II. If you'll recall the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, it was a secret plan where they wouldn't say anything about the Nazis invading Poland, and yeah, Russia just take half. Roosevelt is seen as selling out the Poles, but I would like to just take a moment to draw your attention to the fact that Stalin already had troops on the ground. If there was going to be an issue over this, if Roosevelt was going to go in and help save Poland, he was going to have to do so with force, and that was just not something that they were ready to do at this point. Remember, it is a Cold War, not a hot war. So with Germany and the Soviet zone, we've kind of already talked about this, about how they are going to split up the different parts of Germany. And we're really getting into the beginnings of what's going on with the Berlin airlift. Note, in 1946, those reparations, that extra 25% that was supposed to be going to the USSR, was ended by US, Great Britain, and France. So, of course, the USSR is going to be angry. And by 1948, we're going to get into the Berlin airlift and the Berlin blockade situation, which we will talk about in class. So as you can see, there are different areas in which Berlin has been split up into, and right there in that red zone in the top right-hand corner, that is, of course, the Soviet zone. And the little piece there in the center that all those arrows are leading into, all the little planes, that is the city of Berlin. And inside the black area there where you can see the city of Berlin, go up here, the city of Berlin, you got some of it that is black and some of it that is red, and of course the red part is going to be the part of Berlin that is occupied by and under the control of the USSR. So when the United States cuts off and France and Britain, when they cut off their reparations and other things are happening between 1946 and 1948, like the monetary system it said on the previous slide, the Soviet Union is pretty well going to shut down the roads leading in and out of their section of the country of Germany. The folks on the east side of Berlin that Soviet controls, they're seeing how the western part of Berlin is thriving. They're constantly wanting to go over there. They're wanting to trade. They're wanting to be a part of the capitalist system, and it is faring better, quite better than the communist side. So there's a lot of, there's obviously a lot of spite and a lot of anger by the USSR to the western zone, and again, there's just one last straw. So finally they cut off all roads in, all roads out, and So the U.S. Starts a campaign to get supplies to get things into the western side, the capitalist side of Berlin, and that's when they start flying their air runs, and this lasts for exactly 12 months, as you can see on the screen there. So please take some time to look at the Berlin airlift 5-minute video, especially if you missed that part of the conversation in class. Other parts of Eastern Europe, the Soviet takeover isn't nearly as violent. Most folks are willing to accept communism because they had seen what had happened in between World War I and World War II. So communist nations the communists take advantage of this and set up people's democracies. They were less oppressive than Poland, so again, the people were more forthcoming, more accepting of these ideas. You will notice that later on we will see Poland is going to be one of the countries that rises up against, and one of the first countries to get rid of its communist government when the beginning of the end is near for communism in the USSR. So as we discuss what's going on in other parts of Eastern Europe, you've got a chance at extra credit. If you're seeing this before I mention it in class, great. You know the drill. Follow normal extra credit procedures. If the first time you heard about this was in class and you're just now getting to it, then hopefully you took the chance at extra credit and you know exactly what's going on. So in other parts of Europe, once the United States enacts the Marshall Plan, the Soviet Union is going to kind of clamp down on its countries that it already has, and in some of the other countries where it's been moving in. So you can take a look at this. It talks about Czechoslovakia, what happened as it becomes communist, and again, their favorite method of taking over is to make the Communist Party the only party in the governments, and then that way they can just pretty well rule from there. And Czechoslovakia, as you can see, felt like it was sold out by the West at Munich. Hopefully you remember how come that situation, or why they think they were sold out. What would give them reason to think that the West didn't have their best interests at heart? As just a quick reminder from World War II. And down in Yugoslavia, this is where we finally get into Tito. And yes, for those of you who said this the other day at the practice exam, we're not talking about the Jackson brother. Joseph Tito is going to set up a communist state, and so Soviet Union couldn't be happier until 1948, when he finally breaks with the Soviet Union. Tito controls the country through a brutal police state. So again, those totalitarian dictatorship-like tactics, but the West considers Tito their favorite communist, because again they could hold up someone and say this person broke away from the Soviet Union. Even though they're communist, they still broke away from the Soviet Union. Now it's time to start talking about the long telegram, or the X article. That's why that X is up there. George Kennan was an ambassador to the Soviet Union, and the United States basically asks him, what is the ideology? What are things like over there in the Soviet Union? They wanted his expert opinion. So Kennan sends this 8,000-word telegram back to the United States, letting them know how the Soviets were thinking, whether or not they could possibly coexist with the West. And something that grows out of this, the reason why we have to know it for AP Euro, is it's where we get our theory of containment. The idea that we have to contain communism. We can't let it spread, because once we let one country fall, then another will fall. And that is, of course, where we get this whole idea of the domino theory, that if one country falls to communism, all countries will fall to communism. So we have to spread, we have to contain its spread. And that's what I want you to focus on as we talk about the long telegram, or the X article with George Kennan. So here is, again, bits and pieces of the telegram, most specifically the beginning, that essentially it says, you know, the answer to your question is so intricate and so delicate, so strange to our form of thought. I can't possibly get this the idea out in a single brief message. So here you go. And again, he goes on with 8,000 words. He says, if I tried, it would be to the dangerous degree of oversimplification. So I'm going to have this answer your question in 5 parts. And basically, again, he ties up the telegram for hours trying to send all this stuff. But the questions involved are of such urgent importance that I have to give all my attention to it. So here we go. And essentially, the bottom line is that the communists are impervious to the logic of reason. They're not going to listen to reason, and not only are they not going to listen to reason or deal with you, they're highly sensitive to the logic of force. Meaning their first reaction is force. Not to talk things out, not to be civil, logical, reasonable, but just go in with brute force and take care of things. So this whole idea, again, of them not being able to listen, they're not going to be reasonable, and they're going to be forceful, goes back to this idea of containment. The USSR perceives itself at perpetual war with capitalism. So again, that ideological difference that causes the Cold War mentality. The USSR viewed left-wings but non-communist groups in other countries as an even worse enemy of itself than to the capitalistic ones. So we've got to go in and take care of that. And the US would use controllable Marxists in the capitalist world as allies. So the whole idea is that we have to keep this from happening. We can't allow them to manipulate others. We can't allow them to go into other countries and take over. So we have to contain the spread of communism. And that's when, in 1949, NATO is formed. They're the Western Bloc Alliance. Please notice that is not a misspelling of the word bloc. When we're talking about these sets of countries, we don't use the K. We're not talking about a building block here. We're talking about a conglomeration, a set of. And of course, it's a result of the Truman Doctrine. So, of course, the Soviets have to have their response, and that is the Warsaw Pact. So, the communist countries form the Eastern Bloc, and the capitalist countries form the Western Bloc, NATO and Warsaw Pact. Now it's time to stop for your checkup questions. Please go to Edmodo and answer. Describe the events in China, Iran, Turkey, Marshall Truman Plan, the fate of Poland, Berlin airlift, what does it demonstrate about the U.S.? And that bottom question there is, what is containment? What is containment?